Studio. I always love our visits. One of the smartest people I know, Will Flanders from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Good morning, Will.
Good morning. Set the bar too high. Want to lower that a little bit. But,
all right. Too much at the beginning? All right. A very smart person.
That'll work.
There we go. But I do agree with you on the fact that we have things to think about in relation to this election. And one of the things that's sort of, I don't know if it's been pushed aside, because we've had, obviously, the presidential election and the Senate race and all the other races that matter, a race for the assembly seats and all that stuff. But there's also the little question of school district referendums. And you guys at Will have done a fantastic job sort of breaking this stuff out. And it's not insignificant because you and I were talking before the show, and I've talked about this on my program many times. This is a big part of your property tax bill, school districts. And I want you to sort of lay out what you guys have seen, what you're hearing, what you're looking at as far as the referendums that are on the ballot in this election.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a huge component of property tax bills across the state. And what we've seen over time is that districts are using these more and more. Throughout the year here, if you include the spring, we've had over $6 billion in referenda spending that's been requested by school districts around the state. And coming up in the November election here, we're going to have 137 referenda on the ballot across the state in 121 different districts. That's $4.2 billion that's going to be asked for by districts around the state.
$4.2 billion.
Yes.
And I love that the title of this report, Piercing the Fog. Tell us what that means exactly.
Yeah, so what we've seen as we looked at how these referenda are presented in different districts is they're not always the most forthcoming in terms of, providing folks with the information that they need to actually make decisions. We've seen a number of different instances where the total amount of the cost of the referenda is hidden. So what districts will do is they know that they might have one old referendum expiring, and they're going to come back and say, well, we'll do a new one right now that's only going to add X amount of money to your costs. Well, they don't tell you what your taxes would go down if that new referendum didn't go onto the books.
Well, that's not convenient.
Exactly. So, we have a number of different ideas for ways to reform the system, but chief among them is making it explicit to folks what you're actually going to be paying. And we see as we look throughout the state for the referenda that are on the ballot this fall, a lot of them are hiding that information, not making it very clear to taxpayers.
I'm a big process guy. I like to get things done, but I think people need to understand the process, and sort of that clarity that you just talked about is important. So part of your report, just the process for referendum. The school board has to adopt this resolution to issue new debt, right? That's part of it. The clerk submits the referendum to voters with at least 70 days notice, and the referendum is then scheduled for spring or fall election dates. So we, the voters, decide these things. Now, I will tell you that, and you and I talked about this before. One of the things I've noticed about school district referendums lately, and we'll get to the operational stuff they've been asking for as well, because that's part of the next sort of reality for all the people who are voting on these things. I have noticed that many of these referendums are tied to athletic uses. I will call up my own district, Oak Creek Franklin School District, which I live right by the high school. We have a new track and a new stadium and field turf and team buildings and all the nice things. Matter of fact, they've gone so far as to build and construct sort of a what I call a castle at the entrance to the stadium now, with the appropriate turrets and all that stuff. I get it. But when you're talking about referendum and the impact on taxpayers, do the researchers at Will see sort of an over emphasis on athletic uses?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at what some of these high schools have nowadays, right, and make the Packers or the Badgers jealous in terms of the facilities. So what we saw this year, with our look that we did, at least 8 of these referenda mentioned the word athletic, but some of them, as we say, with the lack of clarity around the language that's used. If you're, building a new high school, for example, as we see in Arrowhead, there can be athletic facility things attached to those things as well that are maybe hidden under the surface. So some of them are pretty explicit with it, but there are a lot of others that are doing this stuff maybe with a lot less explicitness.
I know it's in your report. I don't remember off the top of my head the number of referendums that get successfully voted in.
So what we've seen in recent years is about 60% of referenda are successful. It has gone down. If you go back a decade ago, the percentage was significantly higher, maybe about 65 to 70%. So it does seem that voters are getting more weary of approving these things, though it's still a high approval rate. That's
my question. So it's sort of a fatigue with being asked over and over again. I know that Oak Creek were being asked about a pools referendum, which is not insignificant either. It's millions and millions of dollars. When you think about school districts, their ability to do this is how the law is laid out, correct?
This is how the law is laid out, and the idea is that we're giving local folks say in terms of what they're going to spend on schools, and to a large extent that is the case. But you also have to think about districts like Milwaukee, for example, or Beloit, lower income districts. When they go to referendum, what we've seen is that actually does have an impact on the taxes that folks pay across the entire state. So other folks get on the hook for what locals decide. Another thing we've proposed and supported is make sure that if folks in one district going to referendum, make sure that that doesn't have a tax impact on other districts throughout the state as well. It only applies to our lower income districts, but it is another way that sort of we're spreading the costs when districts go to referendum.
He is Will Flanders, Director of Research, and a whole lot more at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. We'll take a break here. We'll continue our conversation with Will after this on the Political Power Hour, 620 WTMJ. Thanks for tuning in to Political Power Hour, 620 WTMJ. Here Monday through Friday, 9 to 10. Don't forget that survey if you want to weigh in on WTMJ survey, SURVEY, to the WTMJ talking text line, 855-616-1620. All right, Will Flanders from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty joining me. We're talking about school referendums, school district referendums. So there's some misleading in my world and in certainly in your report about how these things are pushed forward. Let's touch on some of that so people have a full idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so we mentioned the sort of hiding the decline if the referendum isn't approved, but a couple of the other ones that are important are there's often confusion about what the interaction between the mill rate and valuations are.
Right.
So we've had examples throughout the state in recent years where districts said, here's what your taxes are going to go up based on current mill rates. What's left out is that at the same time, they might be going behind the scenes and doing new appraisals throughout the city. If your house value goes up, significantly, that can lead to a big increase in the tax rate beyond.
Which, oh, by the way, is happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's happening everywhere, right? We're seeing
that sticker shock of getting that reassessment and then looking at your tax bill is overwhelming to some people, especially if they have a fixed income.
Exactly. The other key one that we mentioned is that a lot of these districts will choose balloon payments, which isn't something you usually want to do if you're thinking about your own personal finances, right? But these districts will pass the buck down the road so that we're setting up for much higher payments later on in the referendum's life than we are in the initial years. So we think, again, when we think about things that should be made clear to taxpayers, all of this should be laid out clearly if we're gonna be evaluating these things fairly.
So when you look at these things, and it has become the norm that we're voting on these things almost. Every election there's one happening somewhere, and the numbers, the millions of dollars tied. I mean, I don't know off the top of your head, you remember some of the biggest ones? I mean, obviously MPS was huge.
Yeah, there's a number of large ones. I'll just mention, Madison is over $600 million this year, but some that are more close to home. We have $124 million in Wauwatosa, $260 million in Arrowhead. And when you think about these on a per student basis, Arrowhead is a district with a relatively small population base of I think about 2,000 students. So on a per student basis, this is one of the biggest referenda that we've ever considered. And along with the Madison one, the Milwaukee one, they're not only ballooning in number, but they're ballooning in size as well.
So one of the things that we hear about is, this is, we love our schools. We love our schools. We're willing to invest in them. But at some point, this becomes a burden on taxpayers. I guess I'll ask it this way. At some point, do we see a sort of a taxpayer revolt against, or maybe a legislative, I don't want to use the term fix, but a rewrite on how these things can go forward?
So the answer is yes. We're seeing all of this, right? As we mentioned with the approval rates, they're going down a little bit over time. We also had a recent Marquette poll that asked, would you prefer lower property taxes or more funding for schools? And for one of the first times in that poll, they actually showed more folks supporting property tax cuts than more school funding. So I think combined with some legislative fixes to ensure that folks have all the information they need when they vote on these things, I think we might turn the tide and see things decline a little bit in the future in terms of the number.
We mentioned the overemphasis, my words, on the athletics side. One of the things that we're being warned about is a fiscal cliff for all school districts, that we may see operational referendums. We've seen some of those. Is that the next tide here on the wave of these school district referendums?
Yeah, there are quite a few operational referenda on the ballot across the state this year. What we've seen is that the federal money that came in during the pandemic is coming to an end. School districts are told don't spend this money on things that are for continual operations, but many of them did, of course, and now they're saying we need to replace that money that was lost. So that's one of the arguments that we're seeing. The reality is, if you look at the newest data from DPI, we're spending $17,900 per student in the state now, including federal money. That's over $350,000 of value in a classroom with 20 kids. And yet, we have Secretary Underly saying that we can't keep the lights on in schools throughout the state.
Yeah, she had some pronouncements yesterday about this. We're not funding schools at the right level. I mean, I guess the question would be, what is the right level if this isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to talk to folks and say, what do you think we are spending on our local schools, right? And they'll give you a number, maybe $5,000 per kid, right? When you hear it's nearly $18,000 per kid, I think a lot of folks will have their eyes open and say, maybe we should look at where this current money is being spent and whether rather than going to referenda, maybe there could be some belt tightening like every American's had to do in the last few years. But it's hard, have to get that information out there for folks to think about it.
Always could talk to you longer. Will Flanders from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Great report on these school district referendums. Keep up the good work. We'll continue to have you on to sort of shine some light on some of the things that maybe we aren't thinking about, or maybe we are when it comes to school districts and how they tax the taxpayers. Always great to talk to you, Will.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right, we'll take a break here.